About a minute, and we're just opening up our Gmail account so we can take questions from those of you who are online.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, we can. Sounds good. Okay. All right, so we're going to get started. We seem to be missing one of our panelists, so but we will get started anyway. And first of all, I want to welcome all of you to this afternoon's event on a candid view of investment banking as part of a series of Yale career panels. My name is Peter Young. I'm a Yale class of 74, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this event. It's the fifth in a series of panel webinars focused on careers after Yale. The purpose of the series is actually straightforward, which is we want to provide students and alumni with candid and hopefully helpful views about different professions, but using panels of practitioners who are successful in the field. The objective is simple, is to provide a balanced view of professions that many Yale graduates and undergraduate and graduate students go into, where there are myths and hype, both positive and negative. The careers that we covered last spring were legal and investment banking, and this fall in October, November, we had the medical profession and the consulting professions. Going forward, for the rest of the academic calendar, we'll feature entrepreneurism on February 12th, legal again on March 6th, and drama and film on April 3rd. And actually, we hope to have some particularly interesting panelists at that one. Far more interesting than investment bankers or lawyers. The attendance has really been exceptional at these panels, and the feedback that we've received from those of you who have attended has been very strong. And some of the professions that we're considering to cover starting in the next academic year include education, architecture, government, and nonprofit. This series has been somewhat unique in that we've combined really three simultaneous venues. The meeting room here on Park Avenue, the room at Yale where many of you are seated, and also a number of people who are participating by streaming video and audio conference call. And the panelists are here in New York, connected to Yale via video conference. We had 235 people register as of this morning across the three venues, and we vary the format somewhat depending upon the panel. So for example, for consulting, we had half of the panelists in New Haven and half in New York, similarly for the medical one. So the idea is actually to try to make these events accessible to the greatest number of students and alumni in a high quality manner. And obviously by having a venue at Yale, it makes it easier for students. Having one in New York, it makes it easier for alumni. So you won't be surprised that when we look at the registrants that that's the way it falls. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to thank a number of people and organizations. This has been a collaborative effort on the part of a number of organizations. First, I'd like to thank those at the Yale Undergraduate Career Services, Elaine Mazzarella and Denise Burns. I'd like to give particular thanks to Savina Dahl of the Asian American Cultural Center and her able student assistants, Mendy Yang and Mia Nishikawa, who are, I believe, in the room at William Harkness Hall, correct? If you're there, you can wave. There we go. All right. Thank you very much, Mindy and Mia. Steve Bloom and Elizabeth Rocher of the AYA, Trish Takemoto from the Association of Asian American Yale Alumni, who's here in this room, Mai Lu and Ken Mohan of the Yale Alumni Association of New York, stay in the Junior Class Council. I want to give particular thanks, however, to Paul Wise, who has graciously provided the use of this meeting room and their video conference equipment, Many of you know the firm. Paul Weiss is a law firm and is a firm of more than 700 lawyers whose long-standing clients include many of the largest publicly and privately held corporations and financial institutions in the U.S. and throughout the world. So thank you to those at Paul Weiss. So why is there a need for this event? After all, there are many, many different things. There are recruiters who come to Yale. There are books that are written about professions. Well, the reason why is, and I'll give an example from my own experience. When I was a student at Yale, I started out majoring in physics and math and was headed for medical school. And I was very fortunate, however, after my sophomore year, to have a summer internship with 2 doctors at the Mayo Clinic. And their candid insights, I mean, they loved being doctors, but they were very candid about what it was like to be a doctor and how long it took and so forth. And their insights were really key to the realization that I made that being a doctor was not the right choice for me, and as a result, I shifted to a career in business. So to be honest, as smart and as resourceful as Yale students and graduates are, and we all know they are, it's hard to get candid and credible information about different professions. It's our hope that this series of seminars and webinars will help students and alumni get that candid and credible view so that they can make intelligent choices about their careers. So I'm going to, in a few minutes, I'm going to introduce the panelists and guide them through the 5 topics that were listed in your invitation. And at the end, we're going to open up the session to the audience for questions and answers. Now, for those of you who are connected by the streaming video or conference call, you are muted so that we won't disturb everyone. But to send us questions, please send them to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com, and then we'll be monitoring your questions on this iPad and select the ones to communicate to the panelists. For those of you here in New York, you just raise your hands, and certainly we can see the people at Yale. So if you raise your hands, you'll be able to we'll be able to call on you, and you can step up to the microphone and ask your questions. We do expect to end at around 5:30, but the panelists have been gracious in agreeing to stay to talk to some of the people here in New York who may have questions. So our panelists today, we have Shayara Aziz, who is a managing director in the financial sponsors group at UBS. To my right, we have Kelly Chang, who is a vice president and liability manager at Barclays Capital. We have one missing panelist who may or may not show up. And then I am a moderator panelist because I run an investment banking firm, boutique called Yale Partners. The bios of the panelists are in your invitation, so I won't read them. We have a somewhat diverse group from different firms and different sizes, different practices. And although all of the panelists up here love their profession, they have sworn to me that they're going to be candid and focus not only on the joys, but also the challenges of investment banking. I want to make, just before we start, I just want to make 2 comments. One, the audience today is a mixture of students and alumni. And I want to point out that the entry point and the career path is quite different if you're a graduating college student versus if you're an MBA student or an alumnus with experience. In the latter case, you might enter as an associate, or if you're at a more senior level, if you have an equivalent experience in some of the professions such as private equity or consulting or accounting. As a graduating college student, however, your entry into the investment banking field would be as a financial analyst in what is generally a 2-year program at most investment banks. So the career path and the experience is quite different since you'll be, as a financial analyst, at the most junior level and have more limited exposure to clients and a different lifestyle and workload than you might if you entered at a more senior level. So my point is, I would encourage you, those of you who are still students at Yale in college, to speak with current and former financial analysts, particularly people you know and trust. I'm sure all of you have some people who are friends and so forth who are a year or 2 years ahead of you, and I think that's one of the best ways to get a candid view of what the experience is like and whether you would likely enjoy and succeed in the job. After all, recruiters, their job is not to give you a candid view. Their job is to try to get the best people and encourage them to join. So they don't necessarily talk about FaceTime, long hours, large teams where you are, as you would imagine, at the bottom of the ladder, and the somewhat chaotic management styles of many investment bankers. So I encourage you again, speak with people who you know, who are currently financial analysts, who are recently financial analysts, who know you, because that's the best way to get information. Last, there is no question that investment banking is going through a challenging period today. Part cyclical and part structural, as changes in regulation due to the financial crisis have increased capital requirements, reduced the amount and components of bonuses and pay, and taken away sources of higher profits such as proprietary trading. However, I personally believe that the press has got it wrong and has gone too far in the negative direction when reporting on investment banking. So I encourage you to develop an informed, thoughtful, and unbiased view of the profession. After all, it is tragic to fail to pursue a career that would have been a great fit because you believed false negatives, as much as it is to pursue a career that's based on false positives and hype. So if we think about some of the professions that we've had career panels, I think doctors, if you watch TV, it sounds like a wonderful profession, and you solve problems, save people every day, or at least every half hour. Legal, the same thing. If you watch Law and Order, SUV, whatever, it's a very glamorized view. I think the point is, myths can be too positive, or they can be too negative. I think in investment banking, they're too negative, but I just encourage you to be thoughtful and smart about it and try to pierce through to find out what the true view of the profession should be. So with that, I'd like to start this panel, and let me start out by first asking our panelists their view about where the profession is heading, both good and bad. Should we start with you?
Well, I'll try and limit my comments to maybe 3 minutes. I think the profession, as Peter pointed out, has gone through a really tough and turbulent time, certainly in the press. There have been lots of casualties as a result. There are a lot of people who have left the profession either for financial reasons or because the job description has changed. They've gone off to do other things. So as I look at the future of investment banking, I think the landscape has changed rather dramatically. As Peter pointed out, proprietary trading, which in some instances used to account for a significant portion of any bank's profitability, and therefore the outsized paychecks that one would hear about, people making $50, $60 million a year, that was, tabloid news. I would suggest that those days, by and large, are gone. I mean, you've all seen the CEO of J.P. Morgan, Jamie Dimon, who's arguably one of the best, best CEOs that we have seen in a generation, because something happened on his watch, where he was the CEO, and the bank suffered a significant loss. The board of directors had no choice but to slash his total compensation by 50%. So those are the kinds of things, the public awareness, the social awareness, the legal and regulatory environment that we all operate in, makes it a difficult and challenging environment to operate in. There is no question that is the case. I think, by and large, there may be exceptions, everybody can point to them. By and large, the day and age of really outsized checks that one would hear about, I think those days, at least for the foreseeable future, are gone. Now, what are some of the reasons that causes me to come to the office every day? And I really do enjoy what I do. I've been in the business for 35 years. I graduated in '74 and then '76 out of HBS. And I really, really enjoy what I do. The challenges are there. The environmental challenges are there. The industry challenges, they're all there. But there is the job content of being an investment banker where you are you bring a lot of, hopefully, in everybody's case, you bring a lot of creativity, a lot of professional wisdom that you've acquired over, whether it's a course of 1 year or 3 years, or in my case, over 35 years. Bringing that to the table, making a contribution to a corporation, a private entity, those are challenges which I certainly enjoy, and I think those are things that will continue. So anybody in that room or anybody around the table that was listening in, I think the press in the environment is difficult, but the job content and some of the rewards that you get, and by the way, the financial rewards, while they're no longer outsized, are also continue to be significant and meaningful. So a lot has changed, but in terms of the job content, in terms of the fun that you can potentially have in this business, and at some point we'll talk about some of the challenges of being an analyst, I think those continue to be there for somebody who is interested in this profession. We can speak more about it in due course.
Kelly?
So when I hear about all the speculation about what's the future of financial services, what's the future of investment banking, I always think of the famous quote from Mark Twain where he says, "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." And I feel like there have been many times over the past several decades where people have always said, "Oh, this is the end," that either it's the treasury market has changed or the dot-com bubble has burst, it's the end, it's the end, it's the end. And I just think that having shifts like this, yes, there is going to be more government oversight in respect of the financial services industry, but I think at the heart of what we do over here, we work on behalf of corporations, and I think that the things that motivated me to go to work 10 years ago are still the same things that motivate me to go to work today. So I think banking attracts people who like to work on teams and like to work on transactions, fairly competitive people, and at the end of the day, it's helping a company solve a business problem. So if you like things like puzzles, like what Shara said, even though a lot of the focus is on the compensation, but there are a lot of reasons why people also show up to work every day, great coworkers, very interesting work. And I think that compared to a lot of the other things that I could be doing every day, one of the reasons why I've always stayed in financial services is because I do think that it's a truly interesting business. And I think that as new business needs arise, and banks will come up with new financial products and new financial technologies to help meet those demands, and I think that's why the industry is always going to be growing and shifting, even though there is going to be more oversight these days.
Yeah, I personally feel that all of you should maybe look at the history of this because the reality is it's changed very, very dramatically over the past, say, 140 or 50 years that it's been existing. In fact, only very recently, maybe 1970 or so, just as we got into the profession, the firms became larger. In fact, they were very, very small private partnerships. So the one thing I say, there is no question that there's a tremendous amount of turmoil because structurally the industry is going through some major changes. On the other hand, the other way to look at it is that you think about the need that the investment banks are serving, that doesn't go away. And it's needed by clients in terms of capital raising or M&A or other kinds of, or sales and trading. So that was this. It just means that the companies will really have to change. You're going to find a lot of larger companies having to dramatically restructure because they were structured around a different business environment. The only other thing I would say is I think the industry got too big, and I think grew too fast. And I think before, if you were very good, you did well. But if you weren't very good, you couldn't stay in the business. I think the industry went through a period where average people also did well. And I think now what's happening is it's constricting so that in fact average people are getting flushed out and really exceptional people are going to continue to do well. And as far as I can tell, Jamie he got his pay cut in half, but the half still looks pretty good, right? So it's all relative, and it's all relative. If income is part of your reason for making a career choice, you know, there's no question that investment bankers, by anyone's standard, even in their diminished bonus state, do quite well. So you'll have to take it on a relative basis. So our next question is, I want each of our panelists to pick one myth that they, either negative or positive, right, about the profession that you think is worth mentioning to those of us, those on the audience. Kelly?
So I think one of the myths that everyone knows that investment banking entails a lot of hard work, but every now and then you'll still talk to students and candidates who think that it involves a lot of grunt work, so things like shining shoes and getting coffee. There are much more better and interesting and high-level uses of junior resources at investment banks. So I think that although you do bear the burden of a lot of tasks that seems like, gosh, I don't really understand why I'm doing this. But if you stay in the business long enough, over time, you'll realize that it actually does serve a purpose. So I don't think any of our analysts have ever run around like personal assistants.
Really?
None of my analysts.
So y'all are still shining shoes. You didn't get the memo.
No, I didn't get the memo. I think there, as I spent a lot of time in New Haven and other campuses recruiting undergraduates, and that's a passion of mine. I think what you see coming out, particularly coming out of liberal arts colleges like Yale, is the myth that is perpetuated. There's the grunt work and so forth, but there's also the high glamour. I'm going to be in iBanking. I don't know who coined that term, but anyway, I'm going to be an investment banker, and there's a lot of sort of razzle dazzle that goes with it. And it's sort of a nice discussion to have when you're sitting at Commons to say, I'm going to be an investment banker this summer or full time. I think that's fine, that's great. It'll look good on your resume when you apply to business school. But the one thing I'd really want everybody to keep in mind is that the work is extraordinarily difficult. It is difficult in the sense that the hours are unpredictable. It doesn't matter whether you're in sales and trading or you go into investment banking. I think the folks in sales and trading will tell you the hours are more predictable. Investment bankers will say the job content is much better. In sales and trading, you can go home at 4 and 5. You can dismiss all of that because the hours are grueling. And they're unpredictable in a lot of ways. I mean, certainly in investment banking, it is, as Peter said right at the very outset, the management style of folks who are in senior levels, including myself, is dyslexic at best. It is not uncommon for us to say, I mean, here I am at a panel, I'm going to go back to the office and I say, oh my God, I've forgotten to get this thing done for tomorrow. And I could have thought about doing that at noontime, but I got carried away with a bunch of things. I have to come to Peter's panel, and then I'll go get back to the office at 7 o'clock. And then some poor guy or gal who's just ordered food from Seamless Web is now just getting ready to go home, just set up his or her date. And, the worst nightmare. I'm going to walk by his or her desk and say, could you please have this ready by 8 a.m. for my breakfast at 8:30. So it is unpredictable, but the one thing that you will get a lot of pleasure out of is being if you're at a good organization, which obviously all of us hopefully belong to, you get an opportunity to also present your work, your analysis to clients, and that to me is one of the most satisfying things. Analysis, as you grow up in a job, that is one of the most satisfying things, where somebody at the CEO level is listening to your analysis, where, you know, obviously you've been coached and guided and you've learned along the way. And it's extraordinarily satisfying when you sit there and you get a moment to speak your piece in the course of a discussion or presentation to a client.
I do want to make one comment just about the myth about financial analysts' job at larger firms versus different. And it can vary quite a bit, but basically what I do want to say is one of the myths is that it's, you know, it's glamorous, you get to see clients, it's very, you know, exciting, you get paid really well, and, you know, and it's wonderful. I would say that the part that is not a myth is that you can do very interesting work, and the kinds of problems that at least your team is trying to solve can be really, really interesting. Sometimes it's mundane, but mundane financing, but sometimes it's trying to deal with an extraordinary, complex, and interesting M&A transaction. However, I will just say that some of the myths are that, in fact, you see lots of clients because you don't. If you're in a team where you're the analyst, there's an associate, there's a vice president, there's a senior vice president, managing director, trust me, you're not going to the meeting to see the CFO, right? The other is, I think, as Shahar said, is that the typical investment banker, if they're just dyslexic, that's a good thing, generally extremely disorganized because they're trying to, you know, part of it's not their fault, but part of it is because they just don't focus on, they focus on the client kinds of things and don't focus on how to make a request in an organized way to the junior people. And that corrects havoc on your personal life, but also you end up doing a lot of stuff that never is used. And why? Because sometimes it's not the fault of the senior person, but sometimes it's the fault of the senior person because they didn't think all the way through, or didn't make that call at 8 a.m. saying do this and wait until 5 o'clock because they were busy, and it makes a huge difference for the junior person. Let's turn to the next question. What are the characteristics of people who tend to do well in investment banking and, not necessarily correlated, tend to be happy? Because you can be good at it but unhappy. I guess if you're terrible at it, you're unlikely to be happy, I guess. But so, Kelly, you want to comment?
Well, I think one thing is just knowing what you're getting into. So I think, you know, there's a very common theme, which is be prepared to work very hard if you are going to build a career in investment banking. And I think following on that is, you know, that's how, and I think also knowing that it's almost like an apprenticeship. So it's not going to be something where overnight you're going to turn into some superstar and be running a deal team. It's year over year, deal over deal, then you start accumulating the experience, you start getting familiarity with how to deal with clients, and then over the years you will start taking on more leadership responsibilities, and then you one day will be giving your junior person the work to do at 7:30 at night because you forgot about because you were running around in meetings all day. But I think people who do well and who are happy in the business are, I think people who, you have to like working with people, because every day what we're trying to figure out is, company is trying to grow, company is trying to raise money, company has an underperforming business unit that they're trying to sell, and every day you're trying to help these people who aren't necessarily the most financially savvy people, but are very good at making widgets, doing their day-to-day job and guiding them through a process. So I think that aspect of almost being a teacher and leading someone through a process is very important. But I also think things like teamwork are important as well, because we always work together on all of our projects. And I think having a little bit of a competitive streak is good as well, because we're all sitting here now, but typically banks, you're working with other banks, or you're trying to or in a bake-off you're trying to compete against other banks to try to win a mandate. So having that type of competitive streak, it does help in this business.
I'm going to mention a couple things. I'll just break the order. One, obviously, since it's an analytical-based profession, you have to be good at analysis, and you have to be good with numbers. Second, you have to be a fairly precise person. In other words, you have to have an attention to detail. Third is really what he said earlier, which is it is such a disruptive, you don't know. At the end of the day, if you look back, your day doesn't resemble at all what you thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it, things that happen with clients, but part of it, working with people. So you have to deal with constant change. If you have a need to control every minute of your life and everything you do, it is not a good profession, right, for you. The other is you have to be able to work on multiple things at the same time and prioritize and figure out which one, because you're working on 2, 4, 6 things at a time. Senior level, you might be juggling 15 things at a time, right? And if you can't handle that stuff. You also have to be able to deal with stress in the sense that you're dealing with people with very different personalities. Some people who are very aggressive, some people are nice, some people are considerate, some people are interested. And that's the way investment banks are, particularly large ones, right? Smaller ones less so. There's more, maybe a similarity of personality or culture. And you got to deal with that. If you can't, it's a miserable experience, or you just won't do a good job, right? So those are the kinds of things that I think, if those things fit you, then you can be very successful. Doesn't mean you're going to be happy necessarily, but you can be successful, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Just before I came here, we were just going through, we had a bunch of resumes that came in from Yale, and we had to select 24 of them to go up and visit for interviews. There were over 150 resumes from Yale. So as I was thinking, reflecting upon this question, and went through the resumes to select the 24, 28 kids that we would be talking to. What are the things that you look for in the resume, which then, based on experience, causes, creates a decent correlation, not a perfect, but a decent correlation between these individuals being be successful in investment banking. Peter pointed, and both panelists actually pointed to teamwork. And so when you look at the resume, we see whether the individual or the individual has been involved in a team. That doesn't necessarily mean, on the athletic field or being a football player, hockey, lacrosse, or what have you, but being able to work in a team, and that is extraordinarily important. And it really, in a funny sort of way, it doesn't matter what kind of team. And I think a lot of leadership, that one talks about in investment banking, a lot of leadership is just being able to be an effective team member. And we look for that in people's resume in terms of the experience they've had, whether they've been on the, whether it's being, raising money for an organization. It doesn't matter, but being part of the team is so important. I think so that's one of the key ingredients. The other thing is certainly having technical skills. Now, again, we recognize, and I think every institution on Wall Street recognizes, that a lot of kids who've been very successful coming out of places like Yale, Harvard, Princeton, do not have the kind of technical training that folks coming out of UVA, Wharton, and others with their undergraduate degrees who've gotten finance, marketing, accounting. I don't even know whether Yale still has an accounting course or not, but I assume they do. But yeah, so but Yale undergraduates are history majors, poli-sci, whatever, and most banks do a very good job in training you, giving you some of the tools so that you can be effective in your job and be able to work alongside somebody who we've hired out of undergraduate at, out of, say, Wharton or Michigan or some other school where they do actually take classes. So we look for teamwork, we look for the ability for people to work in teams and to have the ability to learn new skills, because you definitely will need new skills in this job.
My next question is what types of people tend not to do well or end up unhappy? I think all of us have been in the business long enough to know people who who haven't been successful or ended up unhappy. So maybe cite one or two examples of things that you think are reasons why certain kinds of people don't do well or are unhappy.
Well, so I feel like I felt like there were a lot of unhappiness when I was starting out in my career. So when I was an analyst, and I feel like part of that is because you're coming from this very idyllic world where you're in school and you're in class, and you're a senior in college and you're at the top of the heap, and then all of a sudden you go to this place where you're at the bottom again, and it's incredibly hard work. You're working so many long hours, and you just think, I don't understand the point of this. Why am I putting all this analysis together? And you feel like you have very little control over your life because your boss calls up and he needs something done at the last minute. But I think that if you work long enough and you get to the point where you can see the forest rather than just all the trees, then you reflect on that experience and you realize why you had to do all of that, because as a more senior person you actually need all of that analysis. So I think that I don't think anyone loves being an investment banking analyst because it is very, very challenging. You're the eighth person on the team, so you're not going to get to go to the meetings, but it does get better over time. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of people leave is because they have the luxury of leaving. Investment banking is a very good training ground. It is spending 2-3 years as an investment banking analyst. Everyone understands that it's extremely rigorous. You learn a ton, and frankly, you have a lot of exit opportunities coming out of investment banking. And I think that's why you tend to see a lot of people leaving because they can.
By the way, I want to make one comment. We tried to have some diversity, and we tried to have people who were from different parts of investment banking. We're missing one of our panelists who would have been more from the sales and trading side. And I want to make one point, which I'm sure my colleagues here would agree, and that is that the key to success and the whole environment, if you're in sales and trading, is quite different from the area that the three of us are in, which is M&A, corporate finance, liability management, so forth. I have a friend of mine who transferred into sales and trading. He said, well, and he had his second young kid. He says, it's a race to which of us has the shortest attention span, right? Because sales and trading is not something you sit and analyze something for an hour and do a report, and he used to laugh about it. So I would encourage you that if there is a whole different dimension, which is just as large as M&A and corporate finance, which is the sales and trading side, which is quite different in terms of the skills you need and personality and so forth. I'm sorry we don't have someone today representing that side, but that's a whole different dimension that is, the characteristic of people who are successful on that side doesn't necessarily match M&A and corporate finance. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think as an industry, and again, I'm going to address what I call the old traditional corporate finance side of the business. I think people leave because they get burnt out. Whether they leave after 1 year or whether they leave after 10 years or 15 years, the pace is hectic. There is no question about it. The pace is hectic, it's demanding, and even as you get more senior in the organization, yeah, you may have a lot more client entertainment, but the pressure of the job continues to be pretty severe, because you may not be responsible for doing a lot of the grunt work, the analytics, and staying up. Your job as a senior guy is to be generating revenues, servicing your clients, making sure that everything, all the quality work that goes to the client is at the very top. So the pressure is, you may be out there entertaining clients in the evening, and you hear about lots of glamorous dinners and so forth, but there's a lot of pressure that you take home and take to bed with you. So people do get burnt out. There is no question about it. And I've also seen people, and I've counseled people, kids who come from schools like Yale, who after they've been in it for a year or two, feel that this business is really not for them. And they've gone on to be very successful. I've written recommendations for kids who've gone after investment banking, or folks who've gone on to law school. I've actually written a recommendation for kids who actually went to medical school. So there, this is, I've been in it for a long time. Peter has, obviously for as long as I have. But the fact of the matter is that, people do, find different things to do. I mean, we've had a transition period after 2008, 2007, where a lot of people left the banking business because their expectations, what they set out to do, no longer matched what the rewards were. And so they went off to do other things that, people,
But the reality is also, and this hasn't been mentioned, the reality is a lot of people leave because they're asked to leave, okay? And I'm going to be very blunt about this. Whether it's consulting or legal or investment banking, these are all pyramid service organizations where each year, you can't just say I'm going to stay for 15 years. Along the way, for each level, you either make it to the next level or you exit involuntarily. Right now, there's a lot of involuntary exit because the industry is in a downturn. And believe me, all these layoffs that you're hearing about, they're not all weak people. So, part of the time people leave because they see something interesting or they think that they want to do something different. But I would say that probably the vast majority of people leave is either because they couldn't make it to the next level, and it's just like a law firm where only 1 out of 12 people make it to be partner. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's the same kind of environment. And then, of course, unfortunately, investment banking has a tendency of hiring too many people in a good time, and then when there's a downturn, they lay people off. And so you can argue whether that's a good corporate strategy or not, but that's the way it's done generally at the large firms. The only other thing I would say is there is a difference among boutiques versus large firms. Some of the boutiques are just as guilty of bad management and so forth as the large ones, but at least in the boutiques, and I spent a career at Solomon Brothers and Lehman, and I was a partner in Schroeder's before I started Young & Partners as a boutique. And I started Young & Partners for a couple of reasons. One is investment banks were very small partnerships for about 100 years before they decided to be corporations to the public, and there was a reason. Well, the other is because I felt I needed to have more control over my life and to have a firm where people felt there was more control over their life. Good or bad, I don't, I think I'll let you judge, but they're different segments and different structures that you have a choice, right, as you come out of school. The other question is, what are the typical places that people do go if they either voluntarily or involuntarily leave the profession, right? I happen to believe investment banking has more really attractive ways to leave the profession as opposed to some other things like consulting where it's more challenging, right? But let me ask you that question.
So I think that it depends on what level in your career you're leaving. So a lot of the analysts, they'll leave and they have a host of opportunities, everything from going to a private equity firm or a hedge fund or going to work at a startup. And the thing is no matter what you do, it's just having investment banking on your resume is just a signal to any potential future employer that you are capable of working incredibly hard and that you're very diligent and you have strong attention to detail. And then I think as you get more senior, then you start being added to client accounts and you work with a group of companies over a number of years. And so a lot of people, they end up leaving to go work for one of their clients. And those are some of the progressions that I've seen from people who've moved on.
One of the things that I wanted to highlight is that a lot is changing in the industry, really starting 2012 in terms of how we look at potential new hires coming into the analyst program. And again, I'm focusing on the analyst program, which is certainly what the audience in New Haven is focused on. What we realized was that, as you pointed out, Kelly, that our best and brightest. We train them, we put them through boot camp, we give them, these wonderful tools, wonderful experience, and lo and behold, after 2 years or 3 years, they go off to private equity, or they go off and work at a corporation before they go, and maybe after a year or 2 or 3, go off to business school. And we found that that was one of the dumbest things we were doing in terms of how we were, looking at our personnel. So here's somebody we've trained. The first year they were barely, they barely knew, how to add 2 plus 2 coming out of a liberal arts background. They really become thoroughly proficient in financial analysis, doing all these models and everything else. And just as they hit the peak, we say, okay, the 2-year sort of contract with a lowercase c, the contract is over, you guys can go off and go into private equity. And the private equity guys just gobble these people up. They've been well trained, they worked at all these fancy firms. So what we have done, and a lot of firms have taken the lead, including folks at Goldman Sachs, that said, stop. We want the young people that we hire, we want them to stay. We want them to consider this to be a full-time, like we hire folks out of business school, this to be a full-time, regular wage job. That's the beginning of a new trend. We obviously, we can't prevent somebody from leaving if they, after 2 years, they've been trained and they're getting these calls from headhunters to go off and do private equity. Obviously, you can't prevent it. But what we are trying to do as an industry, not just as a firm, is to try and keep these people. Because in a lot of ways, these young analysts who have been with us for 2 years or 3 years are much more valuable, much more adept at doing these analyses and moving up through the ranks than folks we hire out of Harvard Business School or Wharton or Stanford. So that was the silliness in the system. We as an industry are trying to address that. And I think, hopefully, we will, again, famous last words, because this industry is certainly unpredictable. But we will make a better, sort of effort at trying to retain some of these analysts. But to answer your question, where do they go? Obviously, that question has been answered. But I wanted to say that you're going to see some shifting in terms of how we look at these kids who've been with us for 2 or 3 years. We want to keep them.
Although I would disagree with you in one sense, and that is, I think the industry all along has always allowed a significant percentage of people to go from analyst programs.
But that was more the sort of the sort of the superstar who's going to be promoted, but there was always that implicit contract that after 2 years, sort of all bets are off. Well, now what we're trying to do is try to keep them.
Maybe the percentage has shifted a little bit, but it has been a very regular practice. When I was at Lehman, I would say probably a third of the analysts were offered a 3rd year or a 4th year, and one of the managing directors at our firm, he started as an analyst at Morgan Stanley and ended up a managing director. We had an analyst who made it all, a younger partner, made it to become vice president until he decided to do documentary films, which I never quite understood, but that was his reason for he's still doing it, by the way. So, but I do think, yes, there's a little bit of a shift, I think, to take the percentage from being maybe 20% to a higher percentage.
Yeah.
But we'll see if it's sexual, because the other side of it is there's a certain maturing process also that people get by going out and doing something else too. Now, what I'd like to do is really open it up to questions. And there are 3 groups who can ask questions. We have the people here in New York who can raise their hand. We have the students over there in New Haven who can raise their hand and go to the microphone. And we have people who are online who can email their questions. I've already got at least one that I can monitor and ask on behalf of the people who submit them. So, and I'll remind those who are online that you should just email yalecareerpanels@gmail.com. Let's start with someone from Yale. So would anyone there like to ask a question? Okay. All right, go ahead.
My question is, how important is it to major in economics or in some relatively quantitative field?
Would anyone like to answer?
Not at all, is the short answer. I was a political science major, and the rest is history. But we really don't focus on what your major is. It's really some of the other qualities that members of the panel have discussed.
Kelly?
Yeah, I would say that we just want to see a record of achievement. So we want to see you taking classes where you're pushing yourselves. Because even though investment banking is very analytical, it's not, the more senior you get, the more away from the numbers you get. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a client relationship job. It's about working with people. So it is important to have quantitative abilities, but we tend not to only look at econ majors either.
Yeah, I would answer it in a little bit different way, and that is, major is not so much important, but skills are very important. So if you're an art history major, but it is clear that you're good with numbers and you can do kind of analysis, no one's going to care that you're an art history major. On the other hand, if you're an art history major and you really, you got to Yale because you were good at a certain kind of analysis but not numbers, then that's a problem, right? So I would just say the way I think most people look at it in investment banking is, clearly if someone was a math and physics major, it's unlikely that they can't do numbers, right? And I would disagree with Shadar. You said sometimes you're not sure if they can add 2 and 2. I think most Yale's can add 2 and 2. But they're different.
But they might come up with 5.5.
Right.
Knowing Yale students, it might be, and then have a good argument for that.
So that's really the issue. It's that there's such a diversity within Yale students, and there's some people who really are much more analytical or more math-oriented, and then there are those who they're there for totally different reasons. So it's not the major, it's more to understand the personality traits, but also whether you are likely to be able to pick up the kind of analytical work that is required, right? So hopefully that answers your question. Any other questions from Yale?
What do you believe is the most common mistake that undergraduates make when trying to apply private banking? The way they present themselves.
Well, let me answer it a little different way. I've been recruiting now. I went into investment banking about 9 years after I graduated from business school at Harvard. And I was at Bain & Company when they first started out. So I joined. There were 20 people. When I left, there were 800. I was at one of the leading venture capital firms, and then I went to investment banking at Solomon Brothers M&A firm. I've been recruiting at Yale for many, many years for different firms. And I would say the number one thing I would think that is a real issue is that I think as smart as Yale students are, I think they have trouble being objective about themselves and figuring out what is a good fit. And I have to tell you, we went through interviewing, and our top 2 candidates were still struggling to figure out whether they should be in 3 different professions, right? And it wasn't because of the lack of intelligence, but I think one of the problems, and in fact, sometimes the more intelligent you are, the harder it is for you to be objective about yourself, about what you like and don't like. So I would say this, which is, before you get to the interview process, try to really figure yourself out. What are you truly good at, and what are you not good at? And be objective about it. And what are your likes and dislikes? Truly, I had one person who just said, it finally came out in the interview that they love being outdoors all the time. Well, gee, being an investment banker was just not a really good fit with being outdoors. I said, well, a lot of things. You could be a forest ranger. There are a whole bunch of things you could do that would cause you to be outdoors a lot, right? But not investment banking, right? And this is a true story, by the way. I'm not making this up. So the number one frustration I have when I'm recruiting is where people really haven't thought through their own skills, what they're really good at, and what their strong preferences are, right? And I would encourage all of you, and by the way, this is not true just if you're a student. There are people who age 40 are still trying to figure it out, right? Try to be objective about what you're good at and not good at, and alter your preferences, right? About lifestyle, about incomes, and so forth. And if you conclude that income is important, well, you don't want to be a carpenter, right? Or whatever it may be, right? So you got to be objective about it. So that's my advice, which is try the best you can before you get to recruiting and talking to people to at least try to be objective and answer those questions. What am I good at? What I'm not good at? And what are things about my lifestyle, my preferences, so forth, that truly are very important, right? And does that match up with consulting and so forth? I mean, a good example is consulting. You spend all your time, you know, on the road. You go to McKinsey, their policies, you're out with a client for five days a week, right? So guess what? What are the #1 marriages? It's McKinsey people marrying McKinsey people. Why? Because they're the people you spend the time with. Now, if you're okay with that, that's fine. But if you're not okay with that and you want to spend time with your friends at the town and so forth, you know, that's not okay, all right? So that's the kind of example of being honest about yourself and your preferences and trying to match it up with a career, right? Does that help? Is that a helpful answer?
A similar follow-up, that you kind of describe preferences that obviously are incompatible. So if you're into being in the outdoors, that reveals that iBanking may not be the profession for you. What about, though, speaking about passions that you have that are tangent or parallel to? So, I mean, I'm big into debate and argumentation, so frequently I get the question, well, do you want to go into law? To which the honest answer is, I could go into law, but I'd rather not. Do you see that as being, is it helpful to be genuine about the other passions you have if they run parallel rather than, you know, necessarily with or against the field you're trying to get into?
Well, I think as long as you have a good reason, you know, you never want to knock another profession, but as long as you have you can construct a good argument about, yes, I could do that, but I would prefer to do this because of X, Y, and Z. I mean, I think that in talking about things that you're passionate about, it's fine, you know, but I think to Peter's point, when people say, you know, what do you love doing most of all, you know, don't say something that is completely counter to what you know you'll be doing for 18 hours of the day, right?
Anyone here in New York have a question? Well, I will tell a little related story, which was when I was at Yale, they had in career counseling, they did these tests where you would answer all these questions and they would correlate it with people who were happy in different professions. So the idea that you could figure out whether you really were in sync with being a fireman or whatever it is. And speaking of conflict, you know, I came back after I took the test and they ran it through the computers, and the cat said, the good news, Mr. Young, you have a very high correlation between two professions, almost 98%. One, musicians, and the other, military officers. So my next question was, what the hell do I do with that, right? So the only thing I could think of was maybe be in the military again. Well, no.
You said investment banking.
But when I was interviewing for jobs, though, I didn't tell them that I felt that the two things that I would probably be a musician or military officer, because that wouldn't have gone very far.
I think if you look at the profession, there are lots of sort of components to being an investment banker, and I think the only thing, and Peter mentioned this initially.
We don't know what that is.
Okay.
Do you want me to just hang it up?
Okay.
Okay, hopefully that's gone away. I think even within investment banking, you've got to think through what element of investment banking, to the extent that you're looking at investment banking as a profession, and that's something that you have decided in your mind, that would be of interest to you is what element of investment banking would be of interest to you. Peter obviously mentioned the sales and trading side. The other prolific and lucrative, potentially lucrative side is wealth management, where people go out and manage money, and it's most of the firms on Wall Street have large wealth management platforms, and they do take trainings. All of those wealth management platforms, whether it's ours or anybody else's, they do take trainings, and there's a different progression, and can be equally lucrative along the way. And then there's the standard investment banking corporate finance element, which we've all been talking about. So there may be, the sales and trading side may be of greater interest to you. Wealth management may be of greater interest to you. But I think, as Peter said, it's extraordinarily important to know yourself in terms of what your interests are, and not be lulled into or beguiled into going into investment banking because that's the chatter in Commons or the Berkeley dining room that everybody's looking at investment banking.
And the one thing for sure is, even though it's financially lucrative, don't go into investment banking just because you think you'll make a good income. It is just way too hard to do it for that reason. We have one question. We have one question from one of the participants online. It's from Brian Lowe. He says here, I'm going through investment banking interviews right now, but I have one doubt. I'm very interested in being part of tangible change. While investment banking is extremely important to companies and capital, it seems they act more as grease in the engine, thereby facilitating change rather than really creating it. As senior bankers with close client relationships, does the impact often act as the catalyst for change or merely the means? I'll give a short answer from my point of view and then turn it to colleagues. Depending upon what type of investment banking you're in, you can have a huge impact. And I, for example, was involved with the project where we were trying to decide just the overall composition strategy of the company and really help them think through that they had to be dramatically different in terms of the kinds of business they were in and their size. And that wasn't just, and they followed it and they went through it and we helped them execute it. And that was not just executing change, executing what they wanted. It was truly helping them figure out how they were going to be successful and valuable. And it worked. Let me turn it over to Kelly.
So I think that in terms of transformation, I definitely see that on a corporate level, and that happens whether you're at a big investment bank and you happen to start working on a smaller company, and you can really grow up with some of these clients because over time you're the one who's advising them on their ability to raise capital, which then helps them acquire another division. And then over the course of your career, what you had started working with as a smallish company ends up being a bigger and bigger company. Not every client that you work with, even at a bulge bracket firm, is the size of a General Electric. There are companies of all different sizes and scales.
And you get the last word.
Listen, you do facilitate transactions. There's no question about it. A lot of the large corporations have a lot of fancy, folks with fancy MBAs that have come from schools of equal stature as Yale. Not equal, but comparable maybe. And so they have smart thinkers in each one of these organizations. So you do facilitate and make those and implement some of those strategies. But as Kelly said, your real value added, and this is where you become a value added confidant and a value added participant in the boardroom or in the CFO's office or the CEO's office, is where they seek your advice and guidance. And that's your real value added in terms of, hey, we're thinking about raising money. I'm just making it very simple. We're thinking about raising $100 million for our growth strategy. What do you think is the best way of doing it? And this is the most, one of the most simplest corporate finance questions. Should we go out and issue debt? Should we go out and issue stock? And there's a whole host of options in between. And I think that there is a lot of contribution that an investment bank or an investment banker can make in some of these very, this was a very simple example, but it's a very complex situation, one Peter alluded to, and lots of other examples come to mind. So yes, you facilitate, but you do have an input in terms of trying to come up with an answer which would supplement and add to the thinking of the client that you're working with.
So with that, I noticed it's now about 43 minutes after, and in the interest of, one, making sure that we don't get in between dinner and those people who are here and in New Haven, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us and hope this was helpful. Anyone here in New York who would like to ask the following questions of any of the panelists, we'll be happy to do that and stay for a few minutes. And wish all of you well and a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Very well done. Yeah,
We should do that.
okay.